Being a CISO isn't just a job, it's an identity. The stress, the responsibility, the board meetings, it's what you do every day. But what happens when you step away? Do you go fractional, advisory, speaking, something completely different? Today, we're breaking down what comes after being a CISO, the career paths, the struggles, and how to make the right move. Let's get into it. So quite the topic, right? We have to understand, why would a CISO want to move on to their next path, if it's not retirement in itself? I can only imagine, I have to have, as you kind of think about this, and I see CISOs all over the globe, it's a taxing job. So we talked about the mind map earlier. You've got to manage, no less than 1 million plus one things. There's a significant amount of burnout. You've got a ton of pressure on you all the time. And depending on where you're sitting in the industry, it depends too on how many real incidents do you have in your lifetime, right? There's always that idea of how many heartbeats do we have in a life. But, when it really comes down to it, I can't even fathom, there's a variety of decisions for every single person for any type of career that they're in, but what specifically to CISOs do you see that there's some signals that it might be time to consider some other avenues?
I haven't reached this point yet, so this will just be conjecture based on stuff that I've talked to folks and some of my mentors.
Sure.
But I know for me, I equate it to very similar to like a professional athlete. Your mortality. When do you know that it's time? I think the first thing is every morning just becomes difficult. As much as you want to have that fire and that drive, right? You have to be built. You have to be built differently for this role. Like you mentioned, just the variety and the complexity and of things that fall under your purview, and then you're cautious by nature. A million things can go wrong, and so some of the signals, at least from my vantage point, would be that you're just not as passionate about the problems in front of you. Things don't excite you to the extent that they do. As a CISO, you're obviously a leader, not wanting to spend the time and teach your team, pass on the information to the next generation of leaders, support them, and provide them with enough support. I mean, that in itself can be very taxing, but you find yourself not as excited or willing to do that. And then, finally, I think the patience about just the frustration that this job has, because, say a cross-functional team or someone isn't willing to partner with you as you feel that they should. Projects delays become that much more heightened in terms of how you react to them. I think these are all signals that you have to be honest with yourself that maybe your time has come. Not to say that you have to fade off in the sunset, but I would imagine that these are signals that the current role that you're in, what you're currently doing, may have run its course. So these will be things that I would highlight specifically.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I think you kind of brought it up in another episode that we were talking about too, where it's like you like to build programs, but also wouldn't necessarily want to step into, potentially a net new, greenfield area where you'd have to build everything from the ground up with limited support, right? It's every scenario, every company, every restriction or constraint that exists, I think is a little different. But, when you consider burnout, and burnout's obviously not specific to the CISO role, although, as we focus on it, it seems to be a very high stress, high taxing role itself. And there is, because of that transition phase, it seems like that lifetime is only, a couple of years in, a CISO's tenure, hopefully longer. That's obviously that's from the law of averages, right? We're focusing on the middle, but not, those edge cases, because there are plenty of CISOs that have been in seat for a very long time at their respective locations. But the other piece on that too, it's like when you I always think about the function of, you're doing some role, you're passionate about that role, but it's almost like the what could be next. And there seems to be a lot of opportunities at the very least. If you didn't want to be that sole leader in a security space for just a single organization, there's a lot of opportunities today for CISOs to spread their wings. That's at least from what I've seen. What are you seeing at the very least in that, like, what is that iteration? You've been a CISO, now you can go do. Right.
And I think this is also a function of that. The role is relatively new as well. So, how many folks have reached that end and then now are like paving the way for opportunities following the quote unquote CISO role. A couple of things that I've seen folks that I'm close with pursue and have really enjoyed actually, which is very, very good to hear. But number one, advising. This is something that I personally do currently. Advising and investing in security startups. It's a very dynamic space, right? So every several years, there's kind of a whole slew of new technology companies that are making, challenging the status quo or disrupting. So the ability to provide your expertise in an area that's very dynamic. And there's a whole host of startups that are looking for guidance, looking for feedback, looking for support from someone who has lived experience. And then, sometimes that translates to a board seat. Sometimes it doesn't. But just the fact that to be able to advise and keep your mind sharp and work with some really, be around some really smart, talented, motivated people is something that I think isn't that I'm seeing CISOs or friends of mine pursue. And then the other one is, consulting. I think this is not unique to CISO specifically, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to create a space or a bit a function for yourself to be, do consulting or be like a fractal CISO. Again, it's nice. You can somewhat play on your own terms. It does come with its challenges, but it does allow you to necessarily step away from the day-to-day grind and hopefully not burn out. And the last one that I would highlight, and this is something that, would be enticing for a lot of folks, being in security, you get to interface with a lot of different functions. And so there are things that are areas that maybe a CISO is just passionate about or interested in that they may want to pivot to, right? So our egos may not allow us to sit on a role that we deem or feel to be very senior and then pivot to, toward the end of our career, pivot to a different area of the business and then take on a more junior role than what we're accustomed to. But, I think that's a viable route only because you have to follow your passion, in my opinion. And if this is something that you've come across and you're interested in it and you feel like you could provide value, it would keep your mind sharp and, allows you to get up every morning excited, I would encourage folks to consider that, right? Or you can move to a CTO role, a CI role. I mean, there's opportunities to laterally move. I mean, laterally is probably not the right word, but, just move into another senior role where if you truly are a really good leader, not just a security person, but just a dynamic leader who can build high-performing teams, who can motivate people, who has a history of seeing folks within their organization grow into senior leader roles. That's a skill that's not unique and special to just security. That's sought after in a lot of areas. So I think that if you do fit that bill, or if you do have those characteristics, I would highly recommend or consider that if someone has reached this point in their career.
Right. It's in any type of scenario that exists, like you said, ego plays a big role. I don't think that, and under most circumstances, though, that any path to a leadership role has been entirely linear across the board. Again, law of averages that exists, but it's that, some of the best advice that I've been given in the past is like, if we always look at a linear path, then you're going to be limited to the side steps that get you up to a higher point. So a lot of the experience that a CISO has within their industry or in their past, and now being able to spread that out and impact more, like you said, the fractional CISOs, the advisors, the consultants, the speakers, the thought leaders. There's just so many examples of where there's a lot of benefit, where it's not just if I stop my role as a CISO, then I've got zero options. I think at the end of the day today, with security being so strong and so much at the top of mind, and even like you said, it's a young field, but it's gained such a level of importance that
and
it's not a limiting capacity anymore.
Yeah, and just to add to that, right? Like, being a young field is one thing, but you take being a young field or a young discipline and then comb that with just the regulatory landscape and how dynamic that is, right? So, it's not as if you can think about the CISO role and the strategies that you have laid out and say that, okay, these strategies will live through because, they work today, and 10 years from now or 20 years from now, 15 or 5 or whatever, you have a whole host of new regulatory requirements that are regionally based. Maybe the EU may do something, right? And so what will happen, I think, just as that continues to morph, being able to have someone who's seen several of these changes, right? Who's been through, hey, in time X, we had this regulatory framework that was prominent, and this is the constraints that we were working within. Several years post that, that completely changed, right? And, talk about GDPR. I remember when the first iteration of that was proposed, it was a fundamentally shift from a lot what we had assumed to be true. Imagine how many more of those we will see, and as data becomes so much more important and regulated. And then we talked about AI in a few episodes ago. Like, all this stuff is going to dynamically change the way the regulatory environment. So having someone who can help folks navigate that will be a tremendous skill set that will have a lot of value. And then, you can comb that with someone who has the right temperament. Again, we highlighted the leadership qualities that I think are vastly important. And the last piece, and you highlight this, feels like every episode, which I fully agree with, if he has the business acumen, right? And so you take all that. I mean, I just don't see a scenario in which someone who decides to move on from this particular role would struggle finding to keep themselves busy. If anything, they may be very selective, right? You could be very selective, but it all comes back to like, you still have to follow your passion. Like, put all the other stuff aside. I'm a firm believer is you want to wake up every morning like excited and run through walls because what you're doing is so. It's such a line with just what gets you going every day. So that's something that folks would have to do some soul searching. But I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunities. Leaving the CISO gig is one thing, but figuring out what comes next is a whole different challenge. There's no single best option, but every path comes with its own advantages and trade-offs. In this segment, we're breaking down the pros and cons of the most common post-CISO career moves. Let's get into it.
All right. So we've talked about some different options that CISOs can explore, at least about what they're thinking about for their next career move. Let's start with fractional work. Give me some pros and some cons that a CISO needs to consider before taking on that type of role.
Fractional work. So I think the variety is very enticing. So you'll get, ideally, if you have multiple organizations that you're interfacing with, the fact that you have the ability to see different challenges would be relatively, I think, attractive. And then most fractional roles that I've come across or even been approached to pursue are for organizations that are early in their security journey. And so I wouldn't want to use the word easy, but I think that, folks, when a program is just being stood up, chances are as a CISO, you've seen the full life cycle of a program. So it would be you would be able to provide tremendous amount of value in that scenario because you'll have so much scar tissue to refer back to. I think that, when you talk about looking back at your career, what are some of the things you have done differently, right? Stood up program X. Okay, several years into that journey, we learned we should have made different decisions. Well, being in the fractal role, joining and helping organizations at that early phase, well, here's your chance to really leverage your experience and really shape or provide feedback that has tremendous amount of value and could help avoid some of the mistakes that you've made. The other thing is that if it is a fractal role, it would be probably a mid-size or maybe a startup. So just being in that space, being in that energy, meeting again, partnering or building relationships in that ecosystem is also exciting because there's newer challenges that maybe a technology or a vertical that a startup is looking to disrupt that you would then be exposed to. And so I think that being in the fractal role obviously helps with that. The other thing is that, depending on your circumstance, and I have a really good friend who actually is lucky enough to kind of sit in this chair where he can be very selective, or he's able to be pretty selective in terms of what roles that he takes on or what fractal organizations that he partners with. And so the nice thing there is you can cherry pick to some level, cultures or like organizations and things that you would be excited about. And that's, I think, really attractive about that role as well. And then as that morphs and grows, I'm sure there's other opportunities that come from it, but these were the ones that I would highlight specifically for if someone were to consider the fractal route. And then on the con side, and the one that I've seen just talking with folks is, number one, you have to have a brand and you have to, get to a place to where it's not like you just, what I've seen with folks who've wanted to pivot into this, it's not as easy as, well, I want to be a fractal. Hey, come hire me. There has to be a level of a brand that you have, an area of expertise that you have intimate understanding of. And then, you have to be able to, and I hate to say this, but you have to be able to sell yourself to some extent, right? And so that may be a different type of conversation or a different type of skill set that some CISOs who haven't necessarily, used it over the course of their career may struggle with. The other thing that I've come across in speaking with fractals is that you have to show your value quite often, right? So it's not as if you show up every day and you're just an FTE and you're part of the team, and so there's some equity that you build within just relationships. It's very output driven, and so you'll have to constantly ensure that targets are being met. Your value, your what you're producing for the time is actually tangible and is moving the needle, and that can be difficult at times. Only because even if you within the organization, you may struggle partnering with different parts of the organization to get things done. Well, now imagine you're a fractal CISO who's not there all the time, and you don't have these intimate relationships, and you'll still be faced with those level of challenges, but they become, I would imagine, somewhat exponentially harder. And so that I think also would be an area of concern. And then finally, and this is something that, depending on the type of engagement that the team member would want to engage in, like, what are you liable for, right? We talked about this in a previous episode. Like, okay, if you're supporting the organization, putting a program together, and something goes wrong, are they pointing the finger at you? Are you personally liable? So understanding the nuances of that piece of it would also be, I think, an area that I wouldn't say the dark side, but probably a con to go into that route. Okay, Scott. So we talked about the fractal. How about you kind of share the pros and cons, or the goods and bads, as you weigh, of speaking in thought leadership? Walk us through that if a CISO would want to go in that direction.
Yeah, sure. I think it's one of the. It's a calling, right? It's a vocational calling, no different than, being a CISO in the first place. But when you become that thought leader, a public speaker, you have an impact on a broader audience. right? You've got a scenario where, you're either, meeting, your network is growing, you're having the conversations. I hear a lot of what you talk about, Aftab, about your mentors and people in the space, and, those happen organically. And now when you start to get into those thought leadership and speaking type roles, that expands, potentially coast to coast or globally, depending on what your impact is and what that footprint of your area of expertise is going to take you, and it's unlike, some of the things that we would be, forced with, I would say, from a position of, having to be great at everything or managing the million+1 things. You do have an opportunity to pick that one thing that you are truly passionate about, you were talking about the things that people don't want to pay too much attention to, when they first come in, the controls and stuff like that. We'll put that all out, right? Because now that area that you could become a expert in, you're repackaging that knowledge that you already have. You're getting paid for it. You're also able to double down and really dive deep into some of the research areas. And now you're looking at a way to take some of that skills, the experience, the knowledge, and be able to communicate that out to a wide audience to make a big impact. And there is nothing quite like, being up on big stages, giving, presentations, getting the round of applause. There is a lot of instant gratification, I would say, in a lot of cases for most of any profession, right? You get through a giant regulatory audit, for instance. I could speak to my own past, and everything is thumbs up. You fly through it and you walk out that door, and tomorrow you've still got 80 other projects that you got to do. So there's not like that set of like, hey, high five, we're going to, celebrate in this win. And, it does come with, a lot of visibility as well. So it's becoming a master, I think, as a pro, being able to, have a wider impact and share your experiences. When I go out specifically and have speaking engagements and I look across the audience, and you have everything from students to retirees that are also there to try to, provide some of their knowledge and experience back in some of the Q&A that takes place. And it's a very positive experience that is, educational as well as impactful. It does change landscapes. It does open up a lot of doors that essentially people are contacting you and looking for some guidance and some help and some advisory. And it just spans a lot of different roles. I think, from a con side, it is to some extent, depending on the scenario that you're in for this, especially if you're just like, hey, I'm a public speaker or a thought leader, and you're not tied to any distinct group. You're potentially by yourself. It's gig based, right? You're a transactional type of scenario. Depending on what's taking place in the industry and industry shifts, you still need to be, there's something about being in it to feel it. So when you're up there speaking about it, you can convey it. And if the longer you're away from it, that could be, problematic. So that's where there's some other opportunities that you would have to look at for, from a revenue basis and how are you going to make that money? There's got to be multiple streams that are coming in that keep you both fresh, current, capable, and reachable. The upside too, getting to that point though, is one of the pros that I put out was, you're highly visible and you have a lot of, your network grows. You've got a lot of people that are looking for you or to you for distinct advice, and it's extremely helpful. I just think that it's when you go into it, though, you need to be dynamic. If you just go into that one specialty, if you're just focusing on, a single framework or a single story, and you're trying to, piece that out every single time, at some point in time, everything has a lifetime. And at some point in time, there's only so many people that need to hear that one speech that one time. And depends on the marketing element of it. This is where it is, to some extent, you're running a business on your own. but it's through a large community, and you just need to do it the right way. So there's a lot of things to think about. I personally, very much enjoy the public speaking, function, and being a thought leader and being able to communicate and have great conversations that get deep into weeds that otherwise we wouldn't have the opportunity to in a day-to-day role. But it's something that at the same time, to stay current, to stay fresh, is to always be speaking about something that's relevant to today, that's going to have that impact, and iterate over that multiple times.
Yeah, I just had one question for you. And I was just curious, like, do you think, and I don't know, the certain personality types would probably be better suited for this? And I mean, not to say that anyone couldn't do it, but I would imagine that, maybe in like someone who's a natural introvert or something, that maybe this would be a difficult.
I've met some introverts that are phenomenal public speakers, just phenomenal public speakers. At the end of the day, it's how comfortable are you in front of a crowd? That is everything. When it really comes down to how dynamic of a speaker you are, the more at bats you have, the more iterations that you go through, the better it is that you're going to succeed. But at the end of the day, I think it's comfort, right? So just like anything else, which kind of brings us into our next point here, as we continue to iterate over some of these opportunities. Let's talk about board roles. What are the pros and cons of going in that direction?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I think this is probably the one, if I would have to like take a vote of CISOs, and I think this is the one that folks would probably rank toward the top. I've just conversations that I've had, and folks have even asked me in terms of, hey, help me get a board role, or can you link me with folks who potentially. So, and then I think, and also they're starting to become requirements that the board public. I think the SEC is now requiring that there's more security CISOs that actually sit on the board and have that voice at that level, because of just the importance and how important how important security has become to not just organizations but to national security. So board roles, I think, and even for me, it would be the ideal scenario. So a couple of things, from a pro's perspective, very strategic. So you do have a seat at the table. Your voice is very much amplified, and so you get the chance to have tremendous amount of influence without the operational baggage. So you can share a lot of detail, share a lot of opinions and direction that you think the organization needs to go in, and then for better or worse, allow the organization to execute on it. So that, I think, is very attractive for a lot of folks. Now, granted, not just because it's attractive, you have to have the skill set to be able to provide value there. But I think that would be there's tremendous amount of upside there. The second thing that I've seen is that it's important, once you get onto one board, or able to navigate and sit on one board, it's just cascading from there. So you're on one board, you start building relationships with a certain collection of folks, and then it's, hey, would you be open to helping here, or we can really use your perspective on this board. And what I ended up finding out is it's very lucrative as well. So it's not a lot of day-to-day commitment, but the financial upside is pretty significant. And so that portion of it is very nice. And because at this stage of someone's career, you probably don't want you want some leisure time and some flexibility in terms of that balance. So being able to meet once a quarter, if you're on several boards, and you have an equity stake that's pretty sizable, I wouldn't see any reason why a CISO wouldn't be able to sit in several of these seats and not be able to financially be very well off, and do it actually for long periods of time. I mean, I think the more experience you have, the more time you're on a board, as you grow in season and get later into your years, I think what I've seen is you become more and more valuable. And so, so those would be some of the pros. Some of the cons is there's not a quote unquote paycheck for it. So, you would some of them may be unpaid, depending on where the organization is and what stage they're in. And so that could be problematic for some folks. There may be a high equity stake, but that equity may not be valued at anything until there's like a liquidity event or some way for or some acquisition or something. So that can play into kind of the calculus for an individual as they're looking to make that decision. And then I think the one that I've a frustration that I've heard from peers is, the boards that they've sat on, and I haven't personally experienced this, but just is that the boards don't challenge, or there's not, it's kind of a rubber stamp. And so if that may frustrate you, or if, you generally have a passion around, having certain things executed on, and, maybe the board, there's no appetite for the board to be that way with the current leadership of the company. You don't really have any recourse from that, right? So what do you do? You meet once, you say do X, and they say, appreciate it, no thank you, move on. If that's something that you'd be frustrated about, it's a reality. And so that would be an area that could be, I think, a con. And then, I would probably highlight, I think, the final portion of it as a con, and maybe not a con in terms of the role, but the con. I mean, they're not. These roles are what I've seen are not easy to land, and so navigating that and figuring that out can be difficult. And so that process should start well before you actually reach a level where you want to walk away from your CISO gig, right? So it shouldn't be, hey, I'm walking away, next year. Let me start thinking about this. I think you should have a 3 to 5 year runway leading up to it. So you do have, time to build the relationships, time to understand the requirements and what's needed, build your skill set to navigate some of those conversations as well. So those would be I think the few cons that I would highlight.
Yeah, for certain. It's on the board side, I've seen it time and time again where it's, people are well established, long tenure careers on boards of multiple companies, but there's always that mystery of how do you get cherry picked or hand picked in that type of scenario, and could very well be the network. But, very interesting options that you have out there, as far as where to take that next step in the career, or where do you even just make some temporary change, right?
No, absolutely. And just a big takeaway from the board perspective is, build your relationships. Be genuine in when you build them, be authentic, but it really starts there. Like people, I get it that there's always, hey, I need to do what's best for me. And, I think that's just a reality of human nature. But in this instance, my advice is be genuine, build those relationships, have a strategy around it if this is the route that you're going to. And folks are more than happy to help, just like in anything. If you're upfront about what your intentions are and you're doing them for the right reason, and like I said, you're authentic and you're genuine, start planting those seeds early on.
Most security tools tell you there's a problem. Varonis actually fixes it for you. Our automated zero trust data security platform continuously locks down overexposed data, eliminates unnecessary permissions, and stops insider threats before they can do damage. No endless alerts, no manual cleanup, just real security that works. Want to see it in action? Go to Varonis.com and book a demo today.
In this next segment, we're looking at two former CISOs who made their exit and charted a new course. Where did they go? What can we learn from their decisions? And do their moves make sense for other CISOs looking for their next step? Let's get into it.
All right. The first CISO we're talking about went the path of board seats and then venture capital. Her name is Emily Heath, and she was the CISO at United Airlines from 2017 to 2019. She then became the Chief Trust and Security Officer at DocuSign in 2019 and was there until 2022. Just before she left United Airlines, she joined the board at LogicGate. In 2021, she joined the board of Gen, a publicly traded company, formerly Norton LifeLock. In 2022, she joined the board at Wiz a few months after leaving DocuSign as Chief Trust and Security Officer. In 2023, she became a general partner at CyberStarts, a cybersecurity VC firm. And in 2024, she joined the board at Legit Security. So Emily left her full-time role in 2022, and she's currently sitting on 4 different boards as well as being a partner at a VC firm. What stands out to you here?
Yeah, wow. So first thing that stands out, and I think we highlighted this just moments ago, is that planting the seeds early. I think before being mindful about it, if this is the route that you ultimately want to go. So Emily planted the seeds early from looks like from her track record, and so building those relationships, understanding the requirements, making sure that you have this, understand where your value proposition is, and so building that up, leading up to the decision to just walk away from your full-time gig. And then also, even if you can, ideally it looks like, by doing so also gave her experience to really build, some scar tissue around being on the board and then learning from it as she continued to join more and more boards, right? So it's not only about finding the gig, building relationships to get onto the board, but then once you're there, understanding what's needed of you. And so I think that's very important. And I like what she did with the venture play. I think that's fantastic. Having worked with a lot of VCs and investors myself, I think it's a very, very dynamic space. You get to work with some really, really smart folks, and you're uncomfortable all the time. So I really like what she did there. It'd be something that I would imagine a lot of CISOs would be relatively good at because it's so fast changing. So that's another thing that really stood out to me with Emily's journey. And then, as the one thing about investing and going into the VC world, well, if you're investing in the company, getting a board seat becomes pretty easy because you can, a lot of investment is contingent upon having board seats to ensure that, your investment is protected. So that portion of it comes really relatively easier. But I like that. And especially joining a firm, VC firm that specialized in cybersecurity would make that fit that much more seamless, and then increase the likelihood or the probability of her or anyone to join to make more profitable investments, right? Identify the key technologies that are going to be the next big thing and be successful. And so I think that's a win-win. And I ideally, if I were to have a magic wish, I mean, that would be something that I would be very much interested in, to follow that path. But I like it, start early, build the relationships, well before you decide to leave your current, your full-time gig, get on some more multiple boards, and then leveraging and pivoting to VC in that space. Great playbook. I think it's fantastic. Okay, Scott. So let's talk about another CISO who and I'd love to get your opinion on. Okay, so the next CISO is Dr. Dave Venable. He was at the NSA for 6 years. Later in his career, he became the CISO at Comcast, and LinkedIn said he was there for 8 years. According to his Wikipedia page, Venable regularly speaks at industry and government conferences, including the G20 Summit, the World Economic Forum Summit in Davos, and NATO forums, Black Hat briefings, and European security forums, including the Munich Security Conference and the Warsaw Security Forum. He contributes to and appears on Forbes, BBC, Harvard Business Review, Bloomberg, Information Week, IDG Connect, and a whole host of other media outlets related to cybersecurity, cyber warfare, and international security. In 2019, Venable was listed as one of the investors on the patent titled Encrypted Data Retrieval Systems and Methods to Provide Access to Encrypted Data. So, Scott, this is a very different path than what we talked about with Emily. What's your take?
Quite, but at the same time, different route, but this is a subject matter expert that is called upon by, global leaders, global, organizations and expos and everything else. I mean, we talked a little bit about that whole function of do you get credibility or prestige from where you work? He worked at the NSA. I'd go so far as to say when you look at some of those types of experiences, if you're in a position to get them, you have opened up a wide world in front of you. You're looked at as a thought leader. You're looked at as a subject matter expert, and you have the capability now to, extend and explore that a little bit deeper. So I think in that government style intelligence background, he positioned himself to be a key, global voice. And when you think about not just doing a few interviews, I mean, this guy is getting pulled into, like you said, what was it? Forbes, it was Bloomberg, Harvard Business Review, BBC. I mean, this isn't small, stakes. This is a person that is very likely for a media company or any of these, high level periodicals. They're top of the list. Something cybersecurity comes up, we're pulling in, this individual, this is Dr. Dave, and we're going to utilize his expertise, and he's going to be able to provide some of that thought leadership. It's when you start to consider the avenues from, video to speaking to writing to global recognition and involvement in some pretty significant organizations. He's essentially in a position that, he's the most popular and famous person, and to some extent, when it comes down to some of the cybersecurity circles too, right? Because a lot of people are going back on exactly what he's providing. I think the biggest thing that is standing out to me was he did the being an inventor of a patent encrypted data retrieval system. Now, if I think about this in the context of, could I do anything along those lines without there being back-breaking, departures from my day-to-day role if I was a CISO or any type of job, right? You've got demands, you've got family, you've got life, you've got to sleep, and not to mention you've got to now do this side pet project. Having the capability to meld in what you're doing from a global impact perspective, and then now working on one of a few to work on a patent for a new emerging technology. I mean, this is incredible stuff. And that also, to that point that I was making earlier about that transition of moving into a thought leader, public speaking type of role. He's staying current. He's very much engaged in this very wide topic of cybersecurity and encryption that, he's got a long road ahead of him that, is very attractive, very specific. And it's something that is capable and able with the right background to get you to that position of having that prestige, having that credibility to be even put into that circle to do something along these lines.
Yeah, sure. And the one thing that really stood out to me was the fact that the level of influence he had, like I think you mentioned this, but not just on cybersecurity, but on the way the global kind of economy may in some cases function, right? Because cyber has become such an integral part of how everyone lives their day-to-day lives. So being able to have a voice there and shape some of those policies, I mean, I don't want to say talk about this impact, but imagine the impact of that, right? It comes with a lot of responsibility, but I think that really stood out to me. Yeah, absolutely.
If you're getting value from this show, make sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you listen. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. All right, let's get back to it.
In this next segment, we're playing Trust or Bust. We'll go back and forth with the prompt. The other host will say trust if they like it or bust if they don't. then defend their take. Let's get into it.
All right, first up, fractional CISO rates are going to drop as more former CISOs choose this path. Trust or bust?
I will go bust. Increased supply will have supply and demand, right? So we'll have some influence on, I think, the rates, but I think the demand for security is going to outpace that. So I think this is a bust. I think there's just so much demand for it, and even though the increase of CISOs coming out potentially, this is a bust for me. Okay, up next. Most cybersecurity speakers don't make real money from speaking alone.
I'm going to go with trust. You got to be in the right spot up front. It's not going to be immediate. I have, however, talked to a number of speakers that are, pulling in speaking fees of $100,000 to $200,000 for an hour, slot. Mm-hmm. Depends. These are folks that are, top of the game, recognizable names. But to get to that position, it's up front. Without that network, it's not something that I would say you're going to retire on. But hopefully you're in a scenario too that having been a CISO, you've made all that equity and all that good stuff that we were talking about before, right? That you're not depending on it entirely to move forward. All right. So next one, the hardest part of consulting is constantly proving your value. Trust or bust?
Trust. I mentioned this earlier. Like, you have to constantly show that what you're doing is actually bringing tangible value to the organization. From a consulting or a fractional CISO's perspective, not having that internal relationships or not as visible, you have to make sure that you're highlighting consistently and measurably, like, hey, these are the areas that we are making impact. My work and my time with you is shifting the security posture in this direction. This is how I can prove it. So I trust that. All right, last one. CISOs should look at product or go-to-market roles instead of staying in security. Trust or bust?
That's a trust or bust. It's up to, the CISOs, I think, at the end of the day, right? It's a product or go-to-market role versus a security scenario. That depends on, again, what your passion is. I'm going to take the middle road on this one. This is too much. I would not want to influence in one way or another.
You got to pick one.
You got to pick one.
You got to pick one.
Is there a way to say brust? I just, this is, I guess, okay. If I've got to drive toward it, I'd say trust.
Okay.
Just based on the fact that you've got some opportunities here to shape what, some new market strategies, some new products, things that are gaps in the field today. The number of people I talk to that are looking for that unicorn solution that does everything for them under the one pane of glass doesn't exist, but it could maybe. Yeah.
Fair enough.
For a very high price, I would imagine. But if I'm forced to do it,
you're forced.
F-tab, since you forced me to do it, I'm going to go with trust.
Fair enough. Okay.
In our last segment, Aftab and I are reacting to a cybersecurity scene from Season 8 of the hit TV show Castle. This clip has over 11 million views on YouTube, and it's been called the most accurate hacking scene ever. Here we go.
System breach. Firewall 1.
We got a problem.
What?
Someone synced a rat
Okay,
to my
the
servers.
percentages.
Remote access tool. We're being hacked.
By Loxat?
I don't know.
It'd be nice to be
We've
given a
been so
warning
careful.
before it
How
hits
could they
100%
find
like
us?
that. Well,
Found
okay.
us yet. Just crack the outer layer of our system. I'll start an intrusion inspection and find out who our rat is.
Uh-oh.
What?
They're on to us. They're trying to track our IP address.
Oh, can you stop it?
No. But I can slow him down.
It's coming from inside the city, trying to narrow it down.
Okay.
Well, now they know where they're coming from. Wow. That's a lot of telemetry all synced up in one. Wow. Oh, the cat.
What the hell?
Doesn't show if the percentage of the hack is increasing after these videos, but
Cat videos? That doesn't seem like Locksat. Who would do that?
We're about to find out.
That barely slowed him down. I'm sorry, but he's going to find us in less than a minute. Should we abort?
No, we've only got 2 of the blinky boxes left to go.
Ooh, blinky
the
boxes.
blinky boxes. Never heard that.
Come on.
Heard an incident.
Got it.
Okay, the mapping of
That's
IP
Castle's
address
office.
He must be working with
to a
Haley.
physical
She's got the
address.
skill set for this, and she is about to breach our firewall.
Not
If
sure
she
how
does, they'll
accurate
have
that is,
instant
but okay.
access to our entire investigation.
No, that's going to put a target on Castle's back. We have to stop him.
I can do it, but I need time.
Let me see if I can buy you some.
It's Becca calling. That's Becca. She's calling. What do I do?
Answer it. Let's see how much she knows.
Hey,
Hey, babe.
change your mind about tonight?
Tonight's still not going to work. But what about right now?
I love the way one person is able to do all of this.
My office. That sounds great. I'm sort of in the middle of something
Decryption
right
percentage.
now.
Really? That's too bad, because I'm right downstairs.
Downstairs?
Yeah. I can be up in 10 seconds.
10 seconds is not long at all. Hang on 1 second. We gotta shut it down. She's gonna walk in the front door.
No.
Not
She's lying.
long
Her
at
phone
all.
is pinging from Queens.
She knows it's us who's hacking her. Sorry about that. Just taking off my pants. You coming up?
He knows I'm lying. Hey, you know what? Something just came up. Rain check?
Sure. You know where to find me.
Okay.
Dad.
She's almost in. I could launch a cyber nuke, but it'll completely fry his system.
What's a cyber nuke?
He's got a backup system at home.
Is that a go for launch?
Yes. No.
The cyber nuke worked.
What just happened?
This is fantastic.
Armageddon, I'm afraid.
So Aftab, I got to ask the title. The most accurate hacking scene ever. Is it sarcastic
It's
or is it real?
Sarcastic. Sarcastic. The
Launch
most accurate-
the cyber nuke. Launch the cyber nuke because there's cat videos.
Yes. And I want the cat videos, all of them, not just the one. But
No doubt.
I need that cyber nuke like ASAP right now.
Yeah. These types of things. I mean, you know, I don't know that it would be as entertaining to see like the real hacking that is taking place. You know, it's kind of like anything else, right? Like go put yourself in like a software developer's office and like video record, you know, the Cheetos and, you know, the obsessive coffee drinking and just typing and stuff like that. That being said, they did make this one pretty damn entertaining of all the ones that we've seen.
It absolutely was, and a bit of humor. The phone call between
A lot of humor.
But the one thing, the mapping when he said we know the exact address from the IP address, that was a little far fetched for me because you know.
How about the fact that it started with the radius, right? Like with the center, the address right in the center. It was already there. Like it didn't even need to do a search. It's already there.
Well, the thing that I found interesting is they all have cell phones and they know, you know, husband and wife know it's each other. They could just check each other's GPS location and probably got to the conclusion sooner. But yeah. No,
Pretty funny stuff.
Yeah, it was entertaining. I will say that I found myself drawn in, but in terms of accurate hacking scene, I don't know. I think a few episodes ago, I think we saw probably one that was more accurate, but this one was definitely the most entertaining. Compliance can be painstaking, but here's the truth: it works. Smart security leaders don't fight it; they use it to drive real change. In the next episode, we're breaking down how CISOs turn compliance into a strategic advantage, how you can use compliance to secure budget, board buy-in, and a stronger security program. This is going to be a good one.
And remember, security fuels innovation, complexity is the enemy, and collaboration is the way. Until next time.